G'day, welcome to the Australian Property Podcast. I'm Pete Wragent from Wargent Property Buyers, and I'm here with Chris Bates from the Alcove. G'day, Chris. How's things?
Going well, Pete. Probably one of my favourite times of the week is chatting to you. So looking
No
forward.
phone calls.
No, that's right. It's a good time just to debrief on the week and what's happening and around the grounds and just chat about anything that we're seeing. What have you been up to? I mean, we just went away for an anniversary. I think it was your wife's birthday, the same day as my anniversary. We dumped the kids, which sounds pretty bad, but we left them with my mum and my sister and my stepdad and went up to Wollombi. I'm not sure if anyone knows that, just outside of Sydney. Beautiful area. The valley there is stunning. And but then we spent night there, went to the local tavern and then went around the wineries on Sunday, did a bit of cheese tasting and had a massage and randomly bumped into my best mate at some cafe in Hunter Valley, which was just a random experience. But that was my weekend. We found refreshed and recharged after 24 hours without the kids. How was your wife's birthday?
It was good. Yeah, it was pretty low key, I would say. So we just went out for an Indian feed at in Parisian. Yeah, so I guess like during the week, I've been doing a fair bit of paddleboarding. I've just realised looking on the camera there, I've obviously I need to put some more banana boats on because the sunscreen hasn't done its job, I think. But other than that, been actually pretty busy. Sunshine Coast. I've got a few clients who are looking for homes to buy and been to a few open homes over the past week. And I wouldn't say it's not like the heady period we had 18 months ago or a couple of years ago, but it's busy enough. There's certainly a lot of buyers still milling around and obviously interest rates falling this week. It'll be interesting just to note over the next week or two whether more people are just out and about snouting around again. So, a couple of the open homes are pretty busy, sort of 15, 20 groups around, some of them less so. So Sunshine Coast is obviously a bit cooler than it was during the sort of pandemic rush. And Sydney's just kind of, Sydney and Brisbane seem to be just fairly solid. But I think what everyone's sort of asking is, well, if interest rates are on the way down potentially, does that spark a few more people into action? Does it happen straight away or does it take time for people to speak to their mortgage brokers like you guys and so on? So, a lot of people interested to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, I've been trying to talk about it, and we're always trying to provide a real litmus test on the market, not talk it up, not talk it down, just be real on what we're seeing on the ground, right? And I'd say that over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've absolutely seen a bunch of older buyers, not in terms of age, but in terms of how long they've been looking for. So they've never actually been able to get it all to line up. They've been close, maybe they've gone to auctions or they've made offers before or they've gone to lots of open homes, but never actually sort of gone down the buying process. And then maybe they've done that once or twice and they've maybe done it 2 or 3 years ago or 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe had a relationship breakdown or they've lived overseas or something. So these sort of buyers, they're quite experienced on the emotional pain of being in the market and not making it happen. And they've also, kind of often sitting with a bit of regret, what they could have, should have, would have done, and the properties they missed out on. And so they've got a few mistakes and I find that they're the buyers that, as a new buyer in the market, you don't really want to be competing on. They're the ones that rock up on a Saturday, get the building test done on a Monday and are making offers, and you're still trying to, get your morning coffee on a Monday. And I think that's what we're starting to see in the market. I wouldn't say it's an avalanche. I'd say there's definitely a consensus view from our clients that rate cuts are here, and it's better to buy before rate cuts than after. But the rate expectations could have gone the other way, right, Pete? Like, when you look at the ASX tracker and, there's potentially one less rate cut this year and maybe only 2 or 3. And so if that stays like it is now for the next few months, I think you're going to see a very similar market to maybe late 2024, maybe even early 2024, where, buyers are there, but they're not full of FOMO because they know that rate cuts are going to be slow, and that still means big mortgages. Even if you have 2 or 3 rate cuts, you're still talking mortgages in the 5s, 5.5, and they're big mortgages because of the prices of properties of what you got to pay. And so that would be my consensus view at the moment, is just watching. I do think there's going to be the seagull effect here, which is basically everyone's flocking to the good properties. I've got a number of clients looking at some assets and, just chatting to them. There's 15 contracts out on some of these properties. Like, it's good luck getting that. You've got like a 6% chance of actually getting that property. And even if you have got a big budget, maybe that increases to a 20 or a 30% chance. But there's other people with big budgets. So I think the danger is right now when everyone's sort of tracking to the good properties. If they start running on you and sentiment does shift, you start chasing the market. And it's an awful time to buy when the market's moving like that, isn't it, Pete?
It is. I mean, I saw last weekend the preliminary auction clearance rates that CoreLogic put out, and they're probably the most comprehensive because they go, they span the week and they cover the biggest sample. Well, the Sydney clearance rate was 76.5% or thereabouts. Melbourne was picking up, so I guess that was potentially a bit of anticipation of the interest rate move. And I think I always try to encourage people not to get too excited when interest rates are going up and not to get too excited when they're going down either. I think there's so much sort of shock jock commentary now that, people are, there's a lot of column inches to fill, and also everyone's got a voice and an opinion. But yeah, I think people sometimes, there's too much of a knee-jerk reaction on both sides of the fence. So yeah, there is that. I mean, one thing we do know from previous cycles is that the demand can often shift a lot more quickly than the supply does. And as you mentioned, I think a lot of people online are saying, "Oh, well, one interest rate cut, what's that? It's $50 a week or $100 a month or whatever it may be." But of course, not everybody in the market is a first home buyer. A lot of people, maybe investors with a lot of equity, or you get some older people who've been in the market for decades and they're pretty low on their LVR and they don't even necessarily need the full mortgage pre-approval. So yeah, that's what I'm watching over the next week or two. We had a couple of clients pick up the phone and say, right, can we just accelerate our sort of move here to get something bought because we don't want to be in the rush. Kate Bakos, I noticed in the hour after the Reserve Bank decision, she's a buyer's agent in Melbourne. She said she had 14 calls in an hour. So yeah, I don't know if these anecdotes add up to anything, and the proof will be in the pudding, I guess, over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be. That's right. I think we'll just find the next. I always said in the last few months that it could be the circuit breaker that could stem a little bit of FOMO, and I think what really creates FOMO is when you miss out, right? It's that fear of missing out again. It's the buyer, the wounded bulls they call it. The one who just missed out was the second place at an auction. They don't want to go through that pain again, and they go to the next auction with a little bit extra fight in them, and then they push their budget a little bit more, and that creates even more competition, and you start seeing price movements, and then they miss out on that, and then there's more wounded bulls out there. And I think that's where the market nearly starts to run, particularly if they're buyers that have coming in with a bit of extra pain. They don't want to miss out here and regret it. I sent you through the Productivity Commission report on productivity, right, of the construction sector. And I think this is it's a really interesting research paper, which we'll put in the show notes. But I guess there's lots of different solutions when we talk about creating a more equitable property system, more access to people to buy their first homes or upgrade or renovate or to rent. There's issues with homelessness and key worker, and there's so many issues in our housing market. And I think one of the issues that have been forgotten about is that there's a certain amount of capacity that our construction industry can deliver, and that construction industry isn't tied to residential. Just because you build homes today doesn't mean you have to always build homes. You could decide to move into working for government projects. You could move into commercial property. You could work into industrial. You could do lots of different things. You could decide, I'm going to make money in aged care or, retirement living. So you don't always have to stay on what their skill set is. But, and I think the big issue with Australia, we've got a capacity restraint. There's only so many workers that can build things. And I'd say that we're getting less and less productivity wise every year, and it seems to be a global issue where we're actually building less every year, not more, with our current capacity. You'd think we'd be getting smarter, not worse. What did you take on that report, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Productivity Commission's report, this is by no means a unique problem to Australia. In fact, if you look at the change over the past 20 years, we're actually probably, alongside Germany, one of the least impacted countries. Other countries have had it worse in terms of falling productivity. I mean, a couple of things stood out. One is that it's just taking a lot longer to build homes again. So the average time to complete a detached house has blown out from about 6 months a decade ago to now over, well, about 10 and a half months. So it's still relatively quick. But then for townhouses, it's gone from 9 to 13 months. And for apartments, from 18 to 28 months. So nearly, what's that? It's over, well, it's about 2.5 years. And that's once you've actually got the place built. I mean, one of the impediments in Australia has been the slow approval timeframes. That's one issue. And I think if you look at what the Housing Industry Association has said this week, apart from their usual call to relax lending and cut interest rates, but a shortage of workers. They did an extra 80,000 plus skilled people in the trades, but also just the sheer amount of tax that's on a new dwelling. Probably about half of it is sucked up by government red tape and taxes, and stamp duty is a big chunk of that as well. So yeah, a lot of calls for people to build more affordable housing, but yeah, there's some big sort of impediments in the way there. So yeah, productivity is definitely an issue across the sector, but it's not just an Aussie thing. It seems to be true all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, they are aware of these issues. I mean, on the SMH today, there's a bit of pressure on the government to release their, housing policies and zoning policies around sort of infill sites. So the missing middle, they like to call it. So townhouses and duplexes and those type of properties what can we get faster approval times on? If it hits these metrics, can you get, a faster approval or build more if it has sort of affordability housing in it? You've seen a number of developments in Sydney that have actually increased in height, so their maximum height was say 13 levels and now they're doing 17 levels because they've brought in more affordable housing as a percentage of the overall build. And I think that's great things. I mean, there is always this battle between, NIMBYism and, not in my backyard and actually still building a city that people can afford to live in. But I think the scales has absolutely flipped a little bit around anti-development to pro-development. And councils are just saying, well, I can't fight this, but I'm going to try to get something that still suits the current, property types in the area. But
did you catch that one at Barangaroo with the over at the headland there? It looks like the approval's gone through just for a 7-story sort of effectively luxury apartments. A lot of people are saying, well, hang on, why can't we build 50 stories there? But the reason it's been limited to 7 is to not block views from Observatory Hill, which seems, when you're effectively building a new CBD area, it seems like they probably could have fit more in there. But that's always the competing tensions, right? The existing or the incumbent residents, they don't want overdevelopment. A lot of the YIMBYs are saying, well, we need to push harder on this stuff. So yeah, I would have thought in Brisbane, we've bought a lot of properties around train stations in recent years, sometimes with the potential where you could easily put a 10-story block of units on if the zoning changed. But at the moment, they're often zoned LMR2 just for maybe a 3-story dwelling. So yeah, you would think that would be an easy win to relax some of the building heights directly around train stations. But yeah, it's a pretty slow moving beast, it has to be said.
Yeah, the Barangaroo is an interesting one. I mean, that's been a big discussion. I think it's a lot of Aboriginal sort of history there on that land. And I think that land is changed to a lot of commercial and parks, and it's sat empty for now, I think, for a long time. And you've got a train station there, a new metro there that needs to get service. It's a train station in the middle of the city with nothing around it. And so there's a lot of pressure to build something. But what I would say in Sydney is if you get on the ferries in Sydney and just cruise around, you can't spot too many new developments. Besides in the city, right, where you're building a lot more commercial and new towers are going up, and they're carefully considered to make sure that the city still looks pretty, to be honest. Like you can go in down near Town Hall that I think it's the City of Sydney. I've got a big 3D printed model of the city. It's very interesting to look at. And you can see all the approved developments and what they're considering there. And, they're very careful on what they build. They don't want to just put towers up unless they're really going to look good, to be honest. If you go around on the ferry, you will see very little new developments around Sydney. So I feel like they really avoid building on the harbour and the harbour front. You might see new houses going up, but you won't see many cranes. It's not when you get out of the view from the harbour. I feel like building standards start to relax a lot. And I do think they've made mistakes in the past. If you think about just over the Sydney in around Milson's Point, and go look at that beautiful building that's about 60 levels or whatever it is, right next to the Harbour Bridge there. And it's a bit of an eyesore. A lot of people, brutalists,
I was in the Blues Point Tower, that one.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, God, I remember going up there in the Open Sydney years ago and having a look around with the laundry on the top level, and you're just thinking, too, what a waste of a great site. It was probably good back in the day, but yeah, not the best looking building, I guess, from an external perspective. And I'm a fan of brutalist architecture, but yeah, that one probably a bit of a wasted opportunity.
So I think that's it. There's a little bit of that. If you think about there's a massive tower called Horizon down in Darlinghurst. You look at that town and think, how the hell did that get approved? And I think there was a bit of brown paper bags exchanging when that happened. Because that is that incredible views. I mean, that is a very nice building as well, though. But it just doesn't fit into the current landscape. So they're very hesitant on building anything that's going to stand out like a sore thumb. And I think that's which I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, what's some of the 3 stories we're going to cover this week, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the new metro. The new metro is brilliant. I can't wait for the line to go in from Westmead through Piermont to Hunter Street as well. That's going to take a few years to come online, but yeah, I could see myself moving back to Piermont. That's going to be so good with the fish markets and the harbourside development. And yeah, it's the new metro has almost been universally well received, despite the cost overruns. But yeah, you're right. It looks like Sydney, of all the capital cities, the supply is really struggling. It's expensive to build in Sydney and to own land there. So yeah, well, let's crack on. So if you're not familiar with our podcast format, it's been absolutely brilliant to get Amy Lunardi back. She took a bit of a breather over on maternity leave, but she's back up and running now. And yeah, she's been great to have back on every week. So this is our weekly 2 cent segment where Chris and I just run through the top 3 news stories of the week. So Chris, I guess the first one, there's been enough column inches spilled already on this one, but Reserve Bank made its first move for 2025, cutting interest rates by 25 basis points, taking the cash rate target down from 4.35% to 4.1%. So that effectively removes the last hike of the cycle, which was in November 2023. All 4 of the major banks passed on the cut in full. I guess, yeah, nobody wants to be a political football in the lead up to a federal election. The Reserve Bank's forecast, I mean, they expect the unemployment rate hopefully to peak at only 4.2%, which would be awesome if they can pull that off. I guess, as we might have expected, the press conference was very hawkish. There was basically consumers have warned not to expect any more cuts. It's all data dependent. So we'll have to see what the next few months bring. Markets were pricing in another couple of cuts by around about May and maybe another one in December. But it's all depending on really what happens over the course of the next year. But also in property world, SQM Research updated their forecast for 2025, well, which basically means nominal price gains for every capital city, smallest gains in Hobart and Canberra, big gains in Perth, and a turnaround for Sydney and Melbourne. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose we've already touched on it, but are you sort of getting any feedback from borrowers or people looking to buy homes? I mean, because usually, I suppose a mortgage broker is one of the first places you would see that alongside open homes.
Look, I think it's too early, to be honest. So let's just chat over the next few weeks what plays out. I mean, it's probably a tiny 2.5% increase to borrowing capacity, but there's also, which I've said a number of times over the year, banks are going to have to come up with some more innovation to increase borrowing capacity. So there was talk just in the last couple of weeks, tax is going to get removed for first home buyers. That was an easy one. They tweaked they could make. I think longer loans aren't far away. I think extending interest-only loans to 10, 15 years is probably going to come back on the cards again, where that'll increase how much borrowers can lend. I think APRA will step in and drop the serviceability buffer when we've got access to super potentially in a few months' time if Liberals win the election. So, there's going to be a lot of innovation here because one of the things that makes you feel like you've got more hope is when you increase capacity to people who are borrowing. But ironically, it doesn't do anything really for them. It's really a zero-sum game. Whatever they get, so does your competitors, because most first-home buyers are buying in other areas where first-home buyers are getting. So if you give everyone at an auction 2.5% more capacity, I think they're all going to increase their max purchase price by 2.5%. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. And then once prices run on them a bit, then they go, oh no, we've got to. So you start to create momentum in prices. And so I'd say this rate cut's not going to do too much, but if the expectations are 3 or 4 more are coming, that will absolutely encourage buyers to try to get ahead of it, because they'll be like, well, prices went up after that first one. What are they going to do if they drop 3 or 4 times? And I think that's the worry for most buyers. But too early. I mean, banks are going to pass it on. I think this is going to be interesting to see if the banks start not passing it on, and they start trying to do something called the loyalty tax. And if they don't pass it on, I think that's when you'll start to see a mortgage war erupt again. We haven't really had one for a couple of years now, or maybe it's not that long. But and I think that's going to be interesting, because that's together with rate cuts, people refinancing, and creating more buffers. And I think that will also create people more likely to do investing. And so a mortgage war encourages more demand. So that would be my take on rates, Pete. Too early to tell.
Yeah, fair call. And I guess everybody's been talking about that anyway this week. So this kind of parlays into the second story. The average loan size hits a record high in the December quarter. So this is really the flip side to what we were just talking about. And that is, yes, you can increase borrowing capacity. But if everybody borrows more, you effectively, you're still going to be paying a very similar amount on your mortgage potentially. I guess just looking at the December quarter figures, the average loan size increased by $25,000 over the December quarter for home buyers, driven by a $31,000 increase in New South Wales from $780,000 to $811,000. I do think there's been a bit of a compositional impact here, because as you mentioned, the APRA buffer in a lot of cases is just making it too hard for lower income earning households or individuals to borrow. And therefore, it's kind of skewing the averages higher, because most of the people in the market are the people with higher incomes. They're earning the share of $200,000 income households is been sort of steadily increasing and locking out people at the bottom end. I suppose just on the mortgage war point, interesting, because some of the banks have been reporting over recent weeks. It does seem that the banks are already a little bit, if you look at their net interest margins, there is a bit of pressure there already. So I'm not sure how much scope there is really for a mortgage war, whether banks are prepared to sacrifice some of their profitability for market share. So certainly this week, all the banks just moved in lockstep, but maybe that changes over the next year or two. And as you mentioned, there's a bit to play out anyway over the next 2 months, because the election result will determine a few of the policies. The coalition wants to let first home buyers use their superannuation to buy a first home. Labour Party, there's already been some changes on, or proposed changes for the treatment of HECS debt to disallow that for borrowing capacity for first home buyers. And then, there's been some other slightly wilder suggestions this week. Property Council wants to cap interest rates for first home buyers. And a lot of these things are very much demand side measures. So, they're not going to do much for the housing supply. Do you think that APRA is going to make a change this year? At the moment, they've basically been very quiet. And at the moment, if you borrow, you're still being stress tested for an extra 3 percentage points on top of what you're borrowing at. It seems unusual if interest rates are going down to have such a wide stress test, but I haven't heard anything on that front.
And one of the reasons I love doing this with you, Pete, is I love to read your blog every day, and then I can pick parts of it. I go, oh, that's actually interesting. So you created a great graph, which is the average loan sizes. Oh, actually, I think it's straight out of ABS.
chart,
I won't give you the credit for it, but you did post it. But you can see the average loans haven't really increased probably since 21. If you just sort of say it's been flatlining, right? Yeah, it might look good over a quarter, but they haven't. But borrowing capacity's dropped 30-40%. So you would think that average loans should have dropped 30-40% but what it shows is that people have been borrowing up to their limit. So they had capacity left over. Not everyone was borrowing 6.5, 7 times their income. Now, naturally, sometimes people, particularly on the medium and lower incomes, often wouldn't go up to their max. They were concerned around their short-term job prospects. They were, let's try to have a smaller mortgage versus a bigger one. I'd rather just get something that suits me rather than something a bit more aspirational and bigger. But I would say that they're being pushed out of the market. And a lot of the medium and higher income, and a lot of bank data supports this. And so what you're seeing is a lot of medium and higher income are the ones borrowing. And so they're on higher incomes and their capacities haven't dropped. And so they're able to still borrow at the same level as what people were borrowing for as an average just a few years ago. And that's really supported the bottom end of the market and created a bit of competition. Hence why it's been growing at a faster rate than the medium and the higher end of the market, the top quartile. And that's usually not the case. In boom markets, the top quartile usually grows the fastest, and then the medium and the bottom. And so I think that when you see it from an affordability point of view, the top end's probably more prime for growth in the situation where there's significant cuts and increases in borrowing capacity. But I would say that those average loans, and you can see for owner occupiers, are just going up and up and up. And what people are having to do is spend more and more money on their home, which means less money available for investing. Less money available for investing means less rental properties, which creates more rental challenges, which then forces people to want to own more. And so this is the spiraling effect where, higher prices lead to lower investment. Lower investment leads to, more rental challenges, and then you get more high prices because people are forced to buy security. And yeah, that would be my take on this. And I think those average loan sizes, as borrowing capacity goes up, if APRA step in, I think it makes sense. You'll see pressure. ANZ CEO is going anyway, Shane, but he was very vocal on that APRA needs to step in and reduce serviceability buffer. But I think all the banks will jump on that when rate cuts are happening, and there's predicted big rate cuts because who's looking after the smaller and medium borrowers out there? They're just forced out of the market. Is that really a long-term solution, or do we need to give them more borrowing capacity to enter the market? And obviously it's in the bank interest to do that. And so banks being banks will probably just say that.
Yeah, I think at the moment, when you look at the ABS figures, the lending for new dwellings, especially in New South Wales, is not the same everywhere. It is picking up in some parts of the country, but for New South Wales, owner-occupier lending for new dwellings, it's practically all the way back to where it was in 2002. And if you think about how many extra people we've got in Sydney and regional New South Wales over the past 25 years, it's a lot. And I guess that's part of the issue at the moment is there's not, particularly in Sydney, there's just not really much in the way of new dwellings being built or bought. And therefore, all of that money is just feeding back into the established market. It just feels to me like Sydney's prices need to pop higher before developers actually get interested. And I've been thinking that for a little while. So it's pretty challenging. There's just not, I suppose like just progressively over the past 15 years, like just piece by piece, lending standards have just tightened up. There's been the interest only loans, low doc loans are practically nothing in the market now. And there's a lot more administration and paperwork, not for every borrower, but for a lot of people. And it's just, it's just making it pretty difficult. And it's just not that attractive to buy a new build at the moment. I guess that's what a lot of people are fearing. Plus construction insolvencies, even into 2025, are still running at very high levels, which adds an extra tier of risk. So let's wrap up on this third news story of the week. Ban on foreign buyers buying established homes for 2 years. So this was originally proposed by the coalition. It was a little bit poo-pahd by some of the Labor politicians until they realised maybe it was a popular policy, and they immediately followed suit. So, how many times do we see this in the lead up to an election? One side of politics proposes a housing policy, and then within moments, the other side says, "Yeah, we'll do the same," with no muddling or research or thought. It's really about who can generate the most votes in the right cohorts leading up to the election. So currently, temporary residents in Australia can buy established homes if they've got a Foreign Investment Review Board approval. When you look at these data figures, always lag a lot, and the most recent stats we've got are only for financial year 2023, but there were 5,360 foreign home purchases. So that's not even 1% of all the sales in the market. So you could certainly argue it's a bit of a smokescreen. It's not really a big issue. I suppose the concern might be if you're a temporary resident in Australia, potentially family members overseas could be sort of buffering funds your way, and it could sort of, at the margin anyway, in certain markets, it could make a difference. But just looking at the raw numbers, it doesn't seem like it's a massive part of the market. Maybe it is in certain pockets.
Look, I think, it absolutely in certain parts of the market should be making impacts. I think it's just coming into the election, there's only so many different levers they can pull. Cutting migration's one of them, banning foreign investment into property and saying that that's our issue is just an easy one to take. I think it's fish paper news, to be honest, in a few days, and it has not a very big impact on the market, but they want to look like they're doing something. And there's only so many levers that they can pull in this battle, and they're coming up against some pretty severe other choices, I guess, to drive prices. And so, I think there's a bit of a storm in the teacup, always blaming foreign investment. And I think you've got to be careful looking a gift horse in the mouth, to be honest. I think foreign investment in Australia is one of our luxuries, and it doesn't mean it's always going to continue. And so you want to be pro international investment in countries, because that also can be good news rather than just always competing with home ownership. So I think it's just a fine balance. We've got to be careful how we play that one.
It did seem, the ABC pointed out that part of the reason for pushing on the policy is that when Peter Dutton's social media accounts mentioned foreign buyers, and they saw that post was effectively more popular than a lot of others on housing affordability and housing market policies, and hence why they pushed on that particular button. It just seems like it's a popular one. But then, it's easy for the Labour Party to mirror that one. So I think that I guess the election, it looks like April will be the most favourite month for that to take place. Bit of other stuff going on. Wages figures this week looks fairly soft, to be honest. So there's no inflationary pressures coming from there. I just noticed as well, New Zealand cut interest rates by 0.5. So that's a 50 basis points cut. And Stats NZ are saying a lot of New Zealanders are leaving for Australia. So over half of the citizens leaving are going to Australia. So there's a bit more population pressure coming from across the Tasman as well, as their economy slows down a lot. So, look, you don't want to jinx it, but so far anyway, Australia seems to have once again pulled off a pretty soft landing. But let's not jinx it, because inflation might take off again and the Reserve Bank might have to reverse course. But so far anyway, inflationary pressures seem to be back in the bag, and unemployment is still pretty low at this stage. So let's hope that can continue.
Yeah, there was two sides of the coin coming into sort of Tuesday, right? Markets were saying 90%. But when you look around, we look at inflation, unemployment rate, how can we say the genie's back in the bottle? And, I was sort of thinking, well, is it a negative if we just delay that cut for a little bit longer? Is that really a bad thing? Just to make sure, rather than cutting too early, creating some potentially bouncing inflation. I think the US has got some signs of maybe they cut a bit too hard and too early. And I think, do you want, short-term pain or long-term gain? I was just wondering whether, looking at those numbers, and we are looking at a soft landing, and things aren't, are still quite hot. Do we just hold off on the rate cuts? And I think that's why people are saying, hey, let's not get too excited yet. Because they're not, the RBA commentary isn't that, lots of rate cuts are happening. And until that happens, I think everyone's going to be a little bit cautious, but markets don't act rationally, right? So as soon as people feel like that's where things are going to go, the time to buy index, you see that on the Westpac, and there's always an overconfidence with property, like that. It's not like share markets where people are, become very bearish and then very bullish and they flip back and forth. There's always this intrinsic sort of overconfidence in the property market, and any sign that things are going to get better, investors jump in, right? Because the leverage returns and then what people have, the overconfidence there. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can always say there's uncertainty. UK's had some challenges with inflation coming back, private school fees, employers' national insurance. They've had the energy prices are going to go up again in April. So that's not making the Bank of England's job any easier. I think, just globally, you could always say there's uncertainty. I think the big issue potentially, oil prices, who really knows what's going to happen this year? If there's a successful peace deal in the Ukraine, then potentially that might be an assistance. Trump wants to drill, baby, drill, and maybe that will get production numbers up. But you just don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty around that. And of course, a lot of things like energy prices, it just feeds its way through the whole economy. So, yeah, I mean, Westpac are forecasting the headline inflation in Australia by the middle of the year will be under target, and the core rate of inflation will be in the target band. But yeah, some other countries have seen a little bit of a bounce. I think New Zealand as well will see inflation bounce a bit in the first quarter. So yeah, always be interesting to see how it all plays out. So what's on for you over the weekend, Chris?
I think it's a bit of a quiet one, hanging around the house. We'll play football on Sunday, and yeah, just hanging out around the beaches. What about yourself?
I'm just heading down to Brisbane to catch up with a few of the guys just for a golfing lunch. But yeah, a few open homes to check out as well, but nothing too hectic. And then AFL preseason kicks off next week. So the kids are champing at a bit. They just can't wait for the football to start again. Yeah, my daughter said last week the weekends are just boring without football. So obviously she's learned something well on the sporting side of things. But yeah, pretty excited to get back into the football.
Awesome. All right, Pete. Look forward to chatting next week. Happy Sunday to everyone. Obviously, links in the show notes if you wanted to reach out and chat to the team or follow Pete's blog or get some buying help. So, yeah, appreciate everyone listening and hope you all have a lovely Sunday.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.